Well, hello and welcome. Hello, Laurie.
Hello, Ed, buddy. I'm so
Yes.
glad you're doing this and you're joining the world of podcasting and vlogging and all kinds of things.
Actually just learned that word last week. I learned that it's not a video podcast, it's a vlog.
Right, right.
So
But you can strip the audio and put it on the podcast world too. And boy, we need more content.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. Well, listen, Laurie Watson, Dr. Laurie Watson, welcome. I'm going to briefly introduce the show, and then I'm going to briefly introduce you. And then please, I'd love it if you would share with us more about you. Is that okay?
Sure. Great.
So this is the blog and podcast, The Emotions and the Therapist. My name's Ed Peterson. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and emotionally focused therapy, certified therapist and supervisor in Salt Lake City, Utah. I've been doing this about 20 years. Yeah, that's a lot, right? I always tell people I'm very I'm overeducated. But I am, yes, I'm in this field and I'm very excited about this podcast, very excited about today. Boy, what else do I want to say? I think that's it. We're excited to have all of you here listening to us, watching, and hopefully learning, because that's my hope here, is that we're all going to learn together and talking about emotions and therapy and boundaries and all that good stuff. And super, super excited to have my colleague and friend, Dr. Laurie Watson, with us. And I know Laurie as a member of our international EFT, emotionally focused therapy community. We've met at trainings. We have both been to wonderful trainings with Mr. George Fowler, who's very important to me, and I know very important to you, Laurie. We've learned a lot from George over the years, and Laurie can tell you a little bit about that. Laurie's part of a wonderful podcast with George Fowler called Foreplay Radio. And Laurie is a teacher and a clinician and a sex therapist. And Laurie, could you tell us a little bit more about you? I don't want to get it wrong.
Sure. So let's see, I've been doing this for about 30 years. I'm a little older than you are, and started out as a individual therapist and then eventually moved into group practice. So I have a group practice that is all across North Carolina. I do some consulting for people outside of North Carolina, and people fly in for intensives to work on their sexual life primarily, usually, and their emotional life as well. Those things kind of go together to see me. So that's my clinical work. And then I am a teacher. I am now honored to be able to teach and start teaching in the EFT group. And that's been really exciting because I feel like those are my people. Those are people who understand attachment. And I have been a sex therapist for many years, 20 years, 25, something like that, 25 years, a certified sex therapist with ASECT, but I've always worked from an attachment perspective. So I understand the pursue, withdraw cycle. That's always how I frame things. And I've always framed sexual dysfunction as something within the coupleship. I don't really see that sexual problems are usually standalones. That they're in one person's body. It's something that is co-created between two people and kept in place by the dynamic in the couple. And so I've worked that way. So in my teaching, I've taught at many MFT programs and at Duke and the Chapel Hill, UNC Chapel Hill medical schools, been teaching there for about 15 years on sexual dysfunction. Scary as it sounds, I am often the only class that their OBGYNs ever get on sexuality. I teach a 1-hour class to OBGYN residents, and that's it. That's all the sexual education they get.
They should probably have more than one class.
you would think that people dealing with our genitals and the most intimate part of our bodies would also have really good training on sexual function. And it turns out they don't. And that's actually one of my number one referrers is in my community, the OBGYNs and urologists are dying for somebody to talk to their people about sexual functioning and relationship. And so I get a lot of referrals from that. And then I've been on the radio, a little bit of television. And actually from the radio, I got disappointed once and I didn't get this gig that I wanted. And so I thought, I'm just going to podcast, and really knew that some of what I said was very repetitive. And it seemed to me that, it was kind of, everybody knew that, but I knew from my lectures that not everybody knew what I was talking about. And so that's how the podcast was born. And I've been doing that for 6 years, had a couple of other partners, and now the wonderful George Fowler, who is my buddy and just a brilliant man. And really, I feel like the two of us together, that synergy on the podcast, which is Foreplay Couples and Sex Therapy. We dropped the radio. It's not Foreplay Radio anymore, but you can find us wherever podcasts are found. We're on iTunes and Spotify and everywhere. And, so definitely tune in if you would like to hear about sexual stuff from kind of a clinician perspective. We're fun. We're a little bit funny. I think it's a really deep conversation. And people tell us it's good information for therapists as well as the layperson who's just trying to improve their sex life from a cycle perspective. Like when we learn patterns, and we learn that we participate in relationship in a patterned way, we can kind of solve the problems that we have. So that's what George and I are intent on doing.
Wow. And so the name of the podcast is
Foreplay Couples and Sex Therapy. But if you type in Foreplay, it's the little black dot that comes up, and that's what you're looking for. That's us.
Perfect.
Not the golf game podcast. We're the sex game podcast. Well, sort of.
Yeah, well, I might get lost there because I'm a golfer, so I might get lost there. That's great. Okay, wow. You do you ever sleep?
People ask me that, and I do have a lot of energy. I work a lot, and I feel very passionate about what I do, and it excites me. Even when I leave supervision sessions and I leave therapy sessions, I often feel more energy. I'm an extrovert, so this is really good for me. Very seldom do I reach burnout. Very occasionally, it's like, okay, I need a little pull back and a vacation. But even my vacations, I just went to California and talked to my oldest besties, and we spent the entire time talking about men and sex. Deep talk about men and sex. And so, it was, kind of, this is who I am versus what I do.
So you couldn't really get away from yourself. You couldn't really get away from the therapy world, could you?
And they actually know this about me. They said, Laurie, the podcast is so you. We knew you would grow up doing this because you've always loved to talk about sex. So it's true. The podcast is very congruent with what I like to do. George the other day said, all of us are anxious about talking about sex, except Laurie. She was like born talking about sex, which is true.
That's great. Yeah, well, I'm an extrovert too. And I think that, it's interesting you would say that, because one of the things that I've learned is there's a real, I don't know if it's a majority, but is a large percentage of introvert therapists out there in the world. My wife is one of them, and I work with a lot of very introverted therapists. And I've always been very extroverted. And it's funny because I relate to what you're saying. I kind of eat, drink, and sleep this stuff. And my family, my boys, I have a 14-year-old and an 18-year-old and a 25-year-old daughter, and they just they slap me upside the head and they're like, no more therapy talk. Mm-hmm. I think yesterday I said to my 14-year-old, he said something to me, and I said, Elijah, no, why don't you slow down and tell me how you really feel? And he goes, Dad, stop.
Oh, that's so funny.
So I want to so you went on your trip to California with your besties to relax. Let's just start there. Tell me
Okay.
about the evolution for Dr. Laurie Watson, how you recreate, how you relax, and how you, especially when you think about your work, what you think about your home life too, what do you do to recharge your batteries, to avoid burnout, and to, the general word, to do self-care? What are your go-tos recently?
I'm giggling a little bit because you're asking a sex therapist who is identified as a sexual pursuer of what do I do that brings stress relief and relaxation. And I would say sex is like top of my list.
That is funny, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely sex is right up there. And yeah, my husband and I were parted for not just my trip to my bestie, but he had to go on a work trip before that. And so, we were apart for a couple of weeks and texting each other like, okay, can hardly wait to be home. Yeah, but I think, certainly my husband and I, he's definitely my attachment figure. And sexual attachment is so important to me and does make me feel loved and at peace. But he's also the guy I want to debrief things with. It's not just the vacation. While I enjoy doing fun things and I enjoy seeing new places, I think the most relaxing and best part of life for me is the debrief with my husband, telling him how I felt about the vacation, telling him how I felt about seeing my besties, debriefing with him how the party went and listening to him, like what was his work trip like? What was his reaction to the people he was with? I mean, that to me is connection. That's where I find peace. That's where I feel good.
So if we were to look at what you just said, which we always do in the attachment frame, he would be for you a safe attachment figure. He would be a fun attachment figure. He would be someone who you not only debrief and talk about things emotionally, you're probably interested in talking about things, about logical things with him and ideas. Sounds like you enjoy having sex with him. That's sort of the kind of relationship that most of us want. And it's the kind of thing as couples therapists, if we can even get little pieces of things like that, and I'm sure your relationship's not perfect, but if we can get our couples getting more of those kinds of experiences, like you just said, I mean, that's kind of the goal, right?
Yeah, it is. And of course, we've been married a very long time. And so, yes, we've had lots of ups and downs. I mean, we're so far from perfect and so far from having that all the time. But you did ask me, what relaxes me and what brings me kind of into that peaceful place. And, certainly just for the record, I love to garden. I love to hike. I love to go on walks. I like to exercise. It feels good to me when I use my body. I love my kids coming over and just being with my kids. They are some of my favorite people in the world. And so I enjoy that. And I love to entertain. I threw a big EFT party here in North Carolina, and it was, a bunch of young people, and they had huge appetites. And I always make too much food to every party that I ever make. Right. And my kids were also, one of my sons works for me. He's a sex therapist and an EFT therapist. And, he came into me and he's like, Mom, we need more food. I'm like, what? Because that never happens at our house because we always have abundance. But yeah, so, I love to entertain and I loved doing that. And, next time I'll just double up, because we got a lot of hungry EFT therapists. So
that's great. Well, you need to come out to Utah. Have you been out here?
I have been to Utah. Yes, I've been to Salt Lake City.
Because we will take you on some great hiking trails.
I would love to hike in Salt Lake City. That would be wonderful.
hike in Salt Lake City, or we'll take you down south to some of the southern Utah deserts, and oh, it'll blow you away.
Wonderful. That sounds like fun.
And actually, a little plug for our Northern Utah EFT group is we do have Dr. George, not doctor. Is George a doctor?
He is not a doctor.
But I kind of want to call him that. I think I want to call him doctor.
He's smart.
Maybe that just
Smart. Sometimes I think he's smarter than God.
Maybe I'll just say the smart George Fowler. But George is coming out to do a masterclass for us here in December, which we're excited about.
Yes, that's so neat. That's great.
Okay. All right. So let me ask you a question. This is the same question that I've asked a few people. Talking about emotions, you just shared about what you do for fun, how you recharge, some of the things, and kind of a thread that I'm hearing you talk about is that it sounds like you've learned over the years a lot about your own body and what to do with your own body to connect with yourself and connect with others, like you're saying, hiking, physical things, gardening, sexual things, which is very near and dear to me. I learned early on in my work, especially in EFT the last 6 years or so, was just to pay more attention to talking about the body and talking about and trying to help clients get in touch with what's going on here, right? I think as a culture, we're not very in touch with what's going on here. So let me ask you this. So in the last month or two, if you were to pick a difficult emotion that has come up for you, let's just say it could be with clients, could be in your teaching, a difficult emotion that, fear, anxiety, whatever, something like that, that you've noticed that it's not just fleeting, but you have to deal with, right? You have to pay attention to and ask yourself sort of, why am I feeling this? What's the setting? And then what am I going to do with this feeling? How is it relating to what's happening with this client, et cetera? I'd love you to just pick one. I'm sure there are lots, but something that's more on the difficult side that you've noticed. And how have you dealt with it? Have you thought about it? Even just what do you notice about your own feelings and how they happen?
That's a really good question. I think as you were talking, I was thinking about something that is kind of relevant to our culture and something that I experience. One of the things I've instituted in my organization is diversity training. We do that once a month. We meet as a group every week, and we do an EFT training, a diversity training. We do a sex therapy training, and then we just do a staff meeting. And so we kind of rotate through that. And in the diversity training, it's just been so rich to understand culturally all kinds of things. We talk about racial diversity and sexual identification diversity and sexual orientation diversity, like trying to put our heads around how it might feel to be other than ourselves. And of course, I'm this well-educated, middle-aged, white, heterosexual woman who, I have come to see that the way I see the world is really through privilege,
right.
Huge privilege.
Right.
And I think that as I struggle with my racially diverse patients, particularly, and with our clinicians who come to work and have different backgrounds, different racial backgrounds and cultural backgrounds, and the way they see clients is with different feelings than what I do, and like wrapping my head around this and trying to be empathic about it. I feel oftentimes all the time like I'm missing it. It's like I'm always missing it. I'm always not doing it right and getting it wrong. And so, it's really this sense of, gosh, will I ever be attuned enough
Right.
to convey empathy, to feel empathy, to even know when I've done a microaggression, like to be that aware and to be careful, because my heart says I want to love people no matter who they are, especially if they're different than me. I want to love them in the way that they get that,
Right.
that they get my care and empathy, and because I think it's only in that I could help them. And I just often end up feeling like, okay, I've blown it again. That's kind of what I feel.
Right. That sense of I've blown it again. When Dr. Scott Woolley was on this program just last week, we talked about something very similar, which around here, and I'm sure you've talked about this, is something connected to what you're saying, which is what I like to label what I experience as my own imposter syndrome, which to me feels very similar to what you're saying. It's this voice that I hear in my head when I'm doing therapy in my key relationships, just in lots of different parts of my life. And it's especially strong if I'm not, if I'm in a lower energy, like if my anxiety is up or I'm feeling depressed, right? That voice of, I'm not doing this right. I'm missing it. Oh, there I went again. I messed up, right? It's what we talk about in EFT and attachment, right? Is our view of self.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd love to hear you talk more about that, because I think that, I was going to say new therapists, but therapists and mental health workers of all types who may be watching this, I think people can relate to this feeling of, even when you're brand new, somewhat experienced, very experienced in this field, right? There are different factors that I think can contribute to when we feel that feeling more of, I'm just not getting it, or I messed up again, or there goes, like you say, there's another microaggression. There's something that I didn't catch. There's a moment that I missed. There's a person who I tried to say something in therapy. I just made a conjecture. I just tried to try to get inside what they're feeling and thinking. And they gave me a look, or even told me, no, actually, Ed, that's not what I'm feeling. Or even worse, like, actually, that offends me, what you just said, right? Mm-hmm. So see if you can talk a little bit more about how does that, how do you work with it? How do you work with that feeling?
Well, I think you're right that especially, I just came out of a supervision group where I was the supervisor with early clinicians, and much of what they talk about is their countertransference is, just always feeling overwhelmed, flooded by material, not knowing what to do. And then that makes them feel not good enough. I think unfortunately, with experience, we actually know we're not good enough. Like, we can see the miss, and we can evaluate ourselves that we are missing. I think that's a self-correcting mechanism eventually. And, we have to deal with this part. And I think for me, that I'm not good enough, I'm not enough echoes for many other places in my life that, from childhood forward, that I go to this place of I'm not good enough. So, what hits me, what I know, how I've missed in my work and with a person echoes all the way back to the many times that I have felt not doing it right, not good enough. And I think that one of the things I've learned personally is that I have a part that can be really uber critical of myself, really, really critical, and can kind of look for that in myself. And that I can't just see it and have grace, that I stay in it too long. Yes. And, when we stay in shame and we're really unavailable to the other. So if I'm caught in my shame of, oh, I messed up, I didn't do it right, now how many minutes am I in that I'm unavailable to somebody who works for me, or I'm unavailable to the client? We have to get over things, quick enough so that, or move that shame and deal with it later so that we can become available again to the person that we're working with. And I think that as I move that shame over, one of the things I tell myself, you know what? You're opening up a difficult and a brave conversation.
Right.
You're trying to have a conversation that not many clinics are trying to have.
Right.
We're trying to struggle as people together with diversity. We're trying to care about each other. We're blowing it. We're stepping on each other's toes. But it's a beginning. And
Right.
that's what I tell myself. That's the grace I try to have for myself. This is a difficult conversation, clearly, as a nation and as a world.
Right.
We have not resolved this, and we got to start somewhere. And therapists, we're supposedly the best communicators in the world. Let's start here. And, we're also people, and we have flaws, and we mishear each other, and we let our biases and our prejudices and our racism impact the way we hear each other. But I just tell myself, you're trying, and you got to give yourself credit for doing something. Like when we're overwhelmed, and I think with the world, and the world is very overwhelming right now with shootings and racism, and there's war in the Ukraine, and I think we can feel so helpless.
Right.
And we can feel so overwhelmed, and we can feel like, little old me, what little difference can I make? And it's like, you got to do something, do one thing, do one tiny thing that's set in front of you. And all of us kind of have a calling, or there might be one step, maybe it's, being patient with the neighbor. Maybe it's just trying, like, oh, you know what? My neighbor is a different race. Maybe I should bring over some banana pudding on the 4th of July and introduce myself and say, happy 4th.
Right.
Who are you? What's your name? Where do you guys come from? Where did you hail from? What tradition are you celebrating? Maybe come celebrate with the neighborhood,
Right.
something that is inclusive, and a reach out. And I just think, yeah, it's easy to get overwhelmed, but the world needs us, and we need to do one thing. Just start there, one thing. And that's what I tell myself.
Yeah.
You're doing one thing. You may not be very good at it. You may not be, appropriate in so many ways. You may have all kinds of issues, but you're trying one thing. So.
Right. Wow. There are about 17 things you said that I think are huge and important and wonderful. Here's one thing that just jumped out at me, is that talking about how, what you just said, I really liked it, about how we all can struggle with feeling overwhelmed. And as therapists, this is one of the reasons why I'm really wanting to do this show and this channel, is that I know for me, Laurie, that I can be my worst critic. And there are definitely things that I do in my life as a therapist, as an individual, that are worth criticizing. Like, there are things that I do where I miss the boat, and I am selfish and racist and just fill in the blank. The ways in which I will, in either subtle or not so subtle ways, hurt people, right? Mm-hmm. Hopefully most of the time not meaning to, sometimes maybe I am. Specifically as a therapist, I was talking to my supervisor, Debbie Gilmore, about this, and I was telling her about how hard it was when I first started watching tape. This is about 6 years ago, when I really was diving into the process of moving toward EFT certification, and first watching myself as a therapist on tape, which I hated, absolutely hated, and still I really don't like it. Look who's coming to visit. That's my cat. And I remember the leather on her couch in her office, and I would literally be sitting there watching tape with her of me, and I could feel my body just like shriveling down, just like trying almost to hide, right? And she would say things, she would stop the tape and go, Ed, did you see what you did? That was so good. You were doing this, you were doing that. I'm so impressed. And I'd say, whoa, hold on, Debbie, this is terrible. Like, I don't even think I know the model. You're talking about stage 1, stage 2, reflecting, validating. Like, I'm not even sure I know what I'm doing. And I'm feeling quite insecure because I've been a therapist for 13 years. And now suddenly I'm learning this new model, and I feel so inadequate to do it. And I just felt like what she was asking me to, well, so to make a long story short, I'm trying to relate to what you were saying, is that she'd look at me with these loving eyes and this facial expression. And she would say, Ed, like I was her client. She would say, hey, it's okay. She would say, you can do this. Like, look at what you're doing. She would tell me about the good things, right? And very slowly I feel like that loud voice in my head that was so critical of myself, and was telling me all the ways in which I would never be good enough to do this, right? And then on top of it, I would go to lots of EFT trainings and watch EFT tapes by trainers and people like George Fowler, and then feel doubly inadequate, right?
Yeah.
And but something that I'll never forget that she said, and actually Scott Woolley said this last week to me, and I'd love to get your take on this, is they both said, at what you bring, first of all, is you bring you, meaning that you bring yourself. And if you can bring your vulnerability, you can bring yourself, you can bring your intention to listen, your intention to care, your intention to really understand, right? Your intention to have empathy. And that's what my supervisor, she used to always say, Ed, she's like, you're going to do great at this. And I thought she was just trying to make me feel good. But what she was saying was, she could tell, she said, Ed, you care so much. And that's why you're so hard on yourself, is because you do care so much. Now, of course, there's some ego there. Like, of course, I wanted to be good at it, right?
Sure. We all do.
But, you know, what they just kept saying, and even Scott said this last week, she just said, it's almost like you just got to relax, Ed. And you know, because I asked Scott the same thing. I'm saying, what would you say to a young therapist who was struggling in the same way, right, with the imposter syndrome? And Scott just said, yeah, you just have to relax and realize that your best is going to be enough. Are you going to make mistakes? Yes. Are you going to miss things? Yes. Are you going to have and do microaggressions? Sure. But it's almost like, for us to survive in this work, we have to get to a place where we can walk into therapy, and during the session, whether it's going well or not, have enough of a feeling that we're enough, right? Any thoughts or feelings about that?
Well, I think the word that you use, survive, is what I tell the clinicians in my clinic, is that surviving a session is somehow oftentimes the best gift you can give your clients.
Right.
Just surviving it. You're in a room with two people who have lost connection, who may hate each other. And the fact that you're willing to hang in there with them, to struggle to see both of their truths and survive it, you know, even if they don't say a word and they're just, you know, glaring at each other, and you're holding both of them together in your heart, trying to make sense of it, and you got out of that session, that's a gift. So just survive the session. That's enough.
So hold them together in your heart. You're trying, you're doing the best you can, even if the session feels like it's flying out of control. You wonder if there's any good work going on. You wonder, maybe, are these people healing? Will they ever heal? You have all those thoughts. What you're saying is that if you hold them and you can survive the session and maybe just stay with them the best you can, that's the gift.
Two people that are flying apart, there's one person with them both.
Right.
That's the union right there, is one person is surviving them both. So it's a huge gift.
Yes. It's a huge gift. I just want to pause for a second, just let that soak in, because that's really good for me to hear today.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that's really good for a lot of therapists to hear. Here's an example of that in my work recently. Maybe you could relate or share something like it. I won't share details, of course, to keep confidentiality, but I have a couple, which is like a lot of couples that I've had, that have a very entrenched, very reactive negative cycle that has really been, that cycle was born a long time ago through both of them having a lot of childhood trauma, and both people having a lot of what I just call very emotionally dismissive parents, or at least one. And these were kids that were not, their feelings were not held by the adults who raised them. And so at some level, they felt lonely, and they felt like they were kind of on their own with their emotions as kids. And so a lot of these couples come in to therapy, and what I find is that a lot of them have great chemistry, and talking about the romantic and the sexual part. And I do a lot of work with couples trying to help identify and understand and work with both the regular negative cycles, but also the sexual cycles, because those can be so different at times, right? That a lot of these couples have a great chemistry, right? When they're connecting, right? And when they feel safe, and when they feel just that, when they feel trust, and when they feel safe. Wow. I mean, their physical and romantic connection can be amazing.
Yeah.
These are the same couples, Laurie, that show up a week later or 2 weeks later, and their fights and their reactivity is just, it feels like firecrackers going off in my office, right? And I've done this long enough to understand that from an attachment perspective, that actually makes perfect sense, because when it's good, it feels so good. And when it's bad, it is literally, primal panic.
Mm-hmm.
And, but to bring this back is that what I've learned to do, and I did this last week with a couple where I think 5 years ago, I would have been sitting in that session as a therapist, really feeling like I was failing, really feeling like I can't seem to control this. It's back and forth. I use almost a Rebecca Jorgensen intervention where I'm almost having to sit in between them on the couch this close, right? To physically slow it down, right? And because I used to feel like those sessions that were getting away from me, or I should say away from them, because it's what's important is for them, were failed sessions. But now, very much like you just said, is I feel like if I can just be with them, and sometimes it's just enough with someone who's really angry and really reactive, just to say, hey, can we just slow that down for a second? Because what you just said, Laurie, was so important. And I know you're so angry. And I know you just want everybody in the room to hear how frustrated and angry you are. Right? Just match that. That's a George Fowler thing. Match that energy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if I can do that, just so even in just that moment, that even in their reactive anger, that they feel seen and heard by me and understood. Because usually, in their real life, that kind of reactive anger, people don't experience them and don't give them the kind of, people out in the world, when you're reactive and angry and lashing out, usually don't.
You don't get the validation
They don't
that
look
you
at you
need.
and say, I really
It makes
understand.
sense. Right. Well, Ed, I love that you brought up the sexual cycle. Since I am a sex therapist, maybe we could go a little further with that and talk some more about that. You said something that I wanted to understand a little bit more. You said, couples who have chemistry, and when they feel really safe, then they have great sex and add to their connection. And in my experience, oftentimes it's a two-way road.
Okay.
So many couples, usually one person in the coupleship actually needs safety before they want to have sex.
Right.
And they have to have that sense of I'm connected. But the other person uses the road that the sexual pathway gets them to safety.
Right.
So when they feel sexual and their sexual needs are met, then they do feel safe and they feel more connected emotionally. What do you think about that?
Yeah, 100%. And I was actually talking to a colleague about that just a couple of days ago. And to me, that's a pattern that really transcends gender. I mean, I see that in male, female, all kinds of different, whatever the combinations are, right? But you're exactly right. I mean, I see that as, because yes, and to speak to what I was saying about the kind of like when it's good, right? Or when it's good, it's great, is what I am hearing a lot of couples say lately is like someone who may be in the category of what you just said, who really needs to feel safe and needs things to be a little bit slower and needs to really feel an emotional connection before they even really, their desire really kicks off, and way before any sort of physical arousal can happen, right? That I will hear that partner say, oh, it was so wonderful because my husband or my wife, he came home last week and he brought me flowers. And then we sat together on the couch. And instead of him just like making his move on me and starting to kiss my neck and start to try to undress me, he sat there and he rubbed my foot. And then we talked for a while. And then he asked me, he said, hey, what do you want to do? And I said, I just want to sit and snuggle and watch this Netflix movie. And he sat with me. And then suddenly a half hour later, they're in bed having great sex. Right.
Nice.
But
nice.
what I just tried to bring out was, do you folks see how in that moment, all those different things that you did, partner, was you helped to attend to your partner's attachment needs and to her body and her, call it desire and or arousal needs for safety, connection, slow pace. In her case, it was, and this is not just her, this is, non-sexual touch, right? Because, and actually, and I asked her, I said, what did that mean? Like when he did those things, what was the meaning for you? And she said, I just felt seen and I just felt safe and I just felt comfortable.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And I think that is also what the sexual pursuer needs, to be seen, safe, and comfortable. And sometimes that person's needs need to be met first. Like I get it that many people need that sense of connection first. I really get that. But if we know our partner feels safe in the sexual moment, that's where they get connection first,
right?
That they, feel so much connection sexually. Sometimes we have to offer that. We have to come to them, right? Initiate and say, hey, baby, I know this is how you like it and I'm ready. Right. And, sometimes I say to people, you got to stop, drop, and roll. Every once in a while, when the sexual pursuer asks, you got to catch it. You got to be ready for it because this is their way to connect. And so I totally celebrate what you just said. That was a beautiful moment between this couple. One person really meeting the attachment needs of emotional connection before they moved into sexual connection. Right. But I think likewise, we also have to encourage our clients that sometimes the sexual pursuer's needs of like, my body has to get relaxed. My body has to feel excited. My body has to feel connection, that those needs sometimes have to be met first too, that they deserve to be met in their need in that place as well.
Yes. And maybe, yes, 110%. And maybe that's why another situation that happened about a month and a half ago was actually a more of a sexually pursuing partner, came in with a big smile on their face, and I asked them how things are going. You could hear that the energy was good between them. And actually she said, he said that what happened was that, can't remember, I'm getting the people mixed up, but it was that in this case, it was a man who was more the person who feels the connection in sex and feels closer through sex and doesn't need as much of the warm up, as much as the emotional connection before, is that he basically made the move and they ended up having sex in the kitchen.
Yay.
Which is a place that they used where they used to have sex 20 years ago.
Oh, fun.
And so we were talking about that, and I asked them both, how did that feel, what happened, and how to go, and then, and the man the one who really wanted to do that had made the bid, had made the what I call the vulnerable move to say and act on what he wanted, right?
You're right. I want to hear that again, because you're right. Initiation is vulnerability.
Yes, right. And
feeling desire is vulnerability.
And so here's what happened is, in an enactment, I asked, because he was talking for a while, and then I asked his wife, I said, tell me what you're hearing from your husband here about why he loved that so much. Why did that work for him so much? Why was he, and look at him, right? Can you see that he's so excited talking about this? Can you see that whatever happened between you two really floated his boat, right? And I asked her, I said, well, what do you think was happening, right? And because we've talked about this before, she paused and she thought, and then she said, well, she said, I think that it meant a lot to him that I went along with his spontaneity. And because a lot of times, she said, I don't just do the spontaneous thing. I'm a little shy, she said. But she said, I just sort of got over the shyness and kind of went with it. And I ended up loving it too. But I think it meant a lot to him that I just didn't shut him down.
Nice. Beautiful.
Right?
Beautiful. And I think what you were saying is, you were asking them, what actually happens? What happened? Tell me the details, because that's how we as therapists bring the sexual cycle alive in the room.
Right.
We kind of think that the only thing we really can deal with is emotions, because that's what we can see. But that's why I think it's important to be explicit about sexual details, because that's where we can help. Sometimes we need to help in that very place right there in the sexual details. And I love what you said. You explored it with her, what happened, and then she went with it. You explored kind of both, her emotions about it and the details. So that seems fabulous.
Okay, I know we're running out of time, but could we do a quick role play?
Sure.
Okay, so I'm going to be a client, and I want you to be the therapist.
Okay.
And I'm going to just talk about some sexual situation that happened, and I want you to just kind of share with our audience how you talk to clients about sex and about attachment and about and I'm sure that this is sort of from an EFT perspective, but let's go back to exactly that couple, right, that I just talked about, that example. Okay. And I'll be no pressure here. And I'll be her, and I'll just say, yeah, Laurie, it was good. I was kind of nervous though, because he gets kind of grabby, and he kind of grabbed me in the kitchen and started kissing my neck. And I just feel like there's so much to do around the house, and I know the kids were.
Whoa. You've just told me so many things here. And I want to just take a little bit of time with you to separate out all these things that you experience when you go into a sexual moment.
Okay.
There's part of you, right, that just said, I feel the tug, the pull of all the things around the house I got to do. There's so many things to do
There's
in the
always
house.
the list is always there.
Yeah, the list is there. So there's that kind of pulls you away from the sexual moment. It sounds like even though this time, and I'd be looking at her partner, was really great, sometimes in the past, maybe he's grabby and maybe he moves a little bit too fast, touches your breasts or your genitals or something. And then you don't quite settle in as readily as you did this time. Did I get that right?
Well, exactly. Because sometimes it almost feels like he's a little kind of in my personal space too quickly.
Okay. So sometimes the approach is a little too fast and you feel like he's in your personal space too quickly, maybe it's invasive. And so then you get kind of turned off. But this time it worked. And this time you were able to do this even in the fun place, the kitchen where you used to have sex. And it's kind of a novel thing to do right now because I know you guys do it in the bedroom. You have told me that. So now you feel free enough to throw down on the kitchen and you're comfortable. What was different? What happened for you this time? What made it feel like I can enter the sexual moment?
Well, I mean, one thing that he didn't say was that he let me know, he called me before he came home and he told me that he checked on Billy, our teenager, and made sure that Billy was at a friend's house and checked to make sure when Billy was going to be coming home. And so he was able to tell me, hey, the kids are not going to be home. And that actually meant a lot when he said that. I could kind of tell what he was thinking, but I just thought, okay. And then,
I know you've said that, right? That if the kids are in the house, you have trouble letting go. I think you said that the last session. And I think what you're saying is not only did he take care of something practical, but he knew me. He knew the part of me that got anxious and he prepared that part. He did a little extra step to call and make sure where Billy was going to be. But I'm wondering what it felt like to you that, he cared enough about this concern that you had to set it up well so that the sexual moment was more free.
yeah.
What did it feel like for him to do that?
Well, I think that's kind of what helped me get over my shyness in the moment, was that I just felt like maybe just that. I mean, I don't know. I haven't really thought of it until you said that, but just that little thing that he did. And he asked me about my day and there was a nice little chit chat before. And I don't know, there was just a little bit of a different vibe that I did feel. Maybe the word was like, even though we, had sex in the kitchen, which is kind of risky, kind of out of my comfort zone, I kind of felt respected at the same time.
Beautiful. Nice. Lovely. Would you be willing to tell him, I was able to get over my shyness because I felt respected by you. And that warmth that you gave me when you were talking to me made me feel safe. The fact that you set it up and made sure Billy wasn't going to be home, made me feel cared about. There were so many things that went right in this moment. And would you just tell him, this setup made me feel safe. Thank you so much. And I was willing to enter the moment without as much shyness. And I'm wordy, so I always have to take it back as a therapist and maybe just tell him, I felt respected and I was able to really be with you.
Let's go for 4 more minutes with this. Okay. So,
okay.
All right. So sure. I can tell him that, and then you can talk to him. Yeah. What you did, the other day, and you checking on Billy and everything else, it was actually fun, and you kind of surprised me. But I think I felt respected, but yet in a weird way, it was really good to feel your passion too. Cause I could tell you really wanted me in the moment, but it was different because I could tell you in an animal way wanted me, like you wanted to have sex.
Woohoo!
It actually ended up feeling good because I guess I felt respected.
Are you the partner now, or are you still her?
I'm still her. So
Oh, okay. I got a little confused when you looked at a different angle. I wasn't sure. Who you were
So now
saying.
I'm
Okay.
now the part. I'll be the
So,
partner.
so this other really sexy part came out where you felt his passion kind of in an animalistic way, and it felt good. It was
Yeah.
like that animal part of him came forward, and it sounds like it turned you on.
I'm a little embarrassed, but yeah, it did.
Yeah. Cool. That is wonderful that you could connect, feel safe, and then you let out this freer, less inhibited, less shy part that's kind of the animal meeting animal, your bodies meeting bodies, and it was hot kitchen sex, right? The kitchen was hot.
The kitchen was hot.
Nice. Thank you.
Awesome. So all right. So tell us what were you right there as the therapist? What were you thinking about? What were you trying to do just then?
So I wanted to bring to her mind, she was talking in a jumble about all these things that used to not work, and that she was in something that did work. And so I'm trying to split off and help her realize these are the things that don't work and kind of label them.
Right.
And then this is the thing that did work. And probably if I had had more time, I would have explored this shyness and then what happened that was sexually great and hot, because people do find it difficult to talk about that. But as they talk about it, then we can replicate it. When we can label things, we can organize it.
Right.
And when she can label, this is the thing that felt hot to me, her partner is going to hear that.
Right.
They're more likely able to replicate that in the future, which creates such a strong bond. Without sex being strong, Ed, we really are subject to the attention of other people.
Right.
We're subject to the marriage or the partnership eroding, and we're subject to just not knowing that we're deeply loved, or even that we deeply love our partner. Those are the three things that the research says happens if our sexual attachment is not strong. So she had this powerful experience. Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
I just want her to have it again.
Yeah. So why just say those three things one more time?
Okay. The three things are that we are subject to the attentions of others. We are more subject to infidelity. Mm-hmm. 2, that the marriage can erode, the partnership can just wear down. And 3, that we don't necessarily, we're going to question the love of our partner and for our partner.
Right. Got it. Well, you see, and the thing that I would say is going back to the emotions is, even in that role play, I could feel exactly what you were saying, and that I did feel a little disorganized in what I was saying, because I felt a little flustered, excited, but embarrassed, right? So a little flustered as I was saying what I was saying. And as you were talking with me, your tone, your facial expression, and just the way that you talk to me helped me to organize kind of to understand like why I felt the way I did, and why it did feel good. And it gave me this little sense of optimism, like, wait, like if I were to understand this better, that maybe we could like replicate this, like this could happen again.
Right. Exactly. Nice.
Oh, wow. This is so great. I hope you'll come back and do this with me again. I feel like I have about 100 more questions that I could ask you.
I would love to be back. That would be great. Especially now, maybe sex is going to be in your title, right? So if sex is in the title, you betcha I'm going to want to come back.
Sex needs to be in the title.
I think so too.
So tell people again, if you could, where you practice, where people can find you, and maybe where people can find the therapist in your clinic. And if people want to contact you or learn more about what you do, where can people go?
Okay, great. Well, I would love to invite you to Foreplay Couples and Sex Therapy. That's my podcast, and it's wherever podcasts are found. George Fowler, my co-host, marvelous, We're having a deep conversation. I think it's the conversation most people wish they were having.
Mm.
And we are fortunate enough to kind of explore that and to put our heads together professionally about, what can help people sexually and emotionally. So Foreplay, find me there. If you are interested in clinical work, certainly I'm awakeningscenter.org. But if you kind of Google Laurie Watson, sex therapist, you are going to find me. I'm easy to find, all over the internet. So just articles I've written, books, just things that I've done, podcasts, just Laurie Watson, sex therapy. That's an easy way to find it if you forget. But Awakenings, right? Awakeningscenter.org. That's also pretty easy to remember.
Great. Well, Laurie, I'm tickled and so grateful that you would join me here today. And I hope we can do this again, and hope that you have a great rest of your month of June.
Well, I wish you so much luck in this endeavor, Ed. You are joining the podcasters and the vloggers and the voices of people who are trying to get out there good information for how people get attached, stay attached, and helping the therapist, right? With normalizing all the things that we go through, the negative feelings that we have, what we do with it. And I just appreciate you taking the risk and putting this out there. Thanks for having me.
Okay, great. Thank you and have a good one.
So do you want to stop that now, the recording?